WWE fans have always had a complicated, often hostile relationship with Goldberg. But here's what most people don't realize. This hatred runs so deep that it's actually shaped how an entire generation views professional wrestling. I've spent years analyzing fan reactions, diving into wrestling forums, and studying the psychology behind why one man can trigger such visceral responses from millions of viewers. What I discovered will surprise you, because the real reason fans hate Goldberg isn't what you think it is. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just why this hatred exists, but how it reveals something profound about wrestling culture itself. And trust me, the final point I'll share will completely change how you view celebrity wrestlers forever. The origins of Goldberg's hatred trace back to something that wrestling fans hold sacred: the journey. Picture this: it's 1997, and wrestling fans are watching legends like Bret Hart, who started wrestling at age 12, or Shawn Michaels, who spent years perfecting his craft in small venues across Texas. These men bled for the business, literally and figuratively. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, comes Bill Goldberg, a former NFL player who'd been wrestling for less than a year, and he's immediately positioned as WCW's next big thing. But here's where it gets interesting. The wrestling business has always operated on an unwritten code: you pay your dues. You start in small towns, you learn from veterans, you earn your stripes through years of dedication. Goldberg's meteoric rise violated this sacred tradition in the most public way possible. Within months of his debut, he was defeating established stars who had spent decades building their reputations. What made this even more infuriating for fans was the transparency of it all. WCW wasn't even trying to hide the fact that Goldberg was a corporate creation. His undefeated streak wasn't built on overcoming adversity or developing as a character. It was manufactured through carefully selected opponents and protected booking. Every week, fans watched as another respected wrestler was fed to Goldberg's machine, and each victory felt less like an achievement and more like a boardroom decision. The psychological impact on wrestling fans cannot be overstated. These are people who invest emotionally in storylines, who respect the craft of wrestling, who understand the difference between earned success and manufactured stardom. When they saw Goldberg's push, it felt like a betrayal of everything they valued about professional wrestling. But here's the twist that most people miss: Goldberg's manufactured rise actually worked from a business perspective. Casual fans loved the spectacle, ratings improved, and merchandise sales soared. This created a fundamental divide in wrestling fandom that persists to this day: the hardcore fans who value authenticity versus the casual audience who simply wants entertainment. The resentment deepened because Goldberg's success seemed to validate a corporate approach that prioritized marketability over wrestling ability. Fans began to worry that if Goldberg could become a top star so quickly, what did that mean for the wrestlers they actually respected? Would technical masters like Dean Malenko or Chris Benoit ever get their due recognition, or would the business always favor athletes with the right look and limited wrestling skills? This fear proved prophetic. Goldberg's success became a template that wrestling companies would return to repeatedly: find an athlete with an impressive background, give them a simple gimmick, protect them with careful booking, and push them to the top regardless of their wrestling ability. Every time fans see this pattern repeated, they remember Goldberg as the original sin that started it all. Now, let's talk about what happened when Goldberg actually stepped into the ring, and why it drove wrestling purists absolutely insane. Imagine you're a fan who appreciates the artistry of wrestling. You've watched Bret Hart execute a perfect technical sequence or witnessed Shawn Michaels tell a complete story through facial expressions and body language. You understand that great wrestling is like a dance between two performers, each move building toward an emotional crescendo. Then you watch a Goldberg match, and it's over in 3 minutes. Spear, jackhammer, pin. That's it. No psychology, no storytelling, no technical innovation, just raw power and a predetermined outcome. For fans who viewed wrestling as an art form, this felt like watching someone destroy a beautiful painting with a sledgehammer. But the frustration went deeper than just match length. Wrestling fans pride themselves on understanding the nuances of the business. They can spot a botched move, appreciate a smooth transition, or recognize when two wrestlers have genuine chemistry. Goldberg's matches offered none of these subtleties. His moveset was so limited that fans could predict exactly how every match would unfold before it even began. Here's what made it even worse. Goldberg was being positioned alongside wrestlers who were masters of their craft. When WCW put him in the same conversation as technical wizards like Eddie Guerrero or high-flying innovators like Rey Mysterio, it felt insulting to fans' intelligence. They could see the obvious disparity in skill level, yet the company was asking them to accept Goldberg as an equal, or even superior, performer. The psychological aspect of this cannot be understated. Wrestling fans develop deep emotional connections to performers who they believe have earned their success through superior ability. When they see someone with limited skills receiving the same, or greater, recognition, it creates cognitive dissonance. Their investment in the product feels devalued. What's fascinating is how this created a feedback loop of resentment. The more fans rejected Goldberg's wrestling style, the more WCW doubled down on protecting him with short matches and dominant booking. This protection only reinforced fans' belief that Goldberg couldn't handle longer, more complex matches, which made them resent him even more. The situation was made worse by Goldberg's own apparent discomfort with longer matches. When he was occasionally put in extended contests, his limitations became glaringly obvious. He would repeat the same sequences, struggle with complex spots, and often look lost when matches went beyond his comfort zone. These performances confirmed every criticism that hardcore fans had been making about his abilities. But here's the cruel irony. Goldberg's simple style was actually effective for casual viewers. The spear looked devastating, the jackhammer was visually impressive, and the quick victories created an aura of dominance. While hardcore fans were analyzing technical deficiencies, casual fans were being entertained by the spectacle. This divide between fan segments would become a recurring theme throughout Goldberg's career, with each group's reaction reinforcing the other's position. December 19, 1999, a date that lives in infamy among wrestling fans and represents the moment when dislike for Goldberg transformed into genuine hatred. What happened that night in Washington, D.C., wasn't just a wrestling accident, it was the crystallization of every fear that hardcore fans had about Goldberg's place in the business. Picture the scene. Bret Hart, arguably the greatest technical wrestler of all time, was facing Goldberg in what should have been a routine match. Hart was a wrestler's wrestler, a man who had never seriously injured an opponent in over 2 decades of competition. His reputation for safety and professionalism was legendary. Then, in a moment that would haunt wrestling forever, Goldberg delivered a super kick that caught Hart flush in the temple, causing a severe concussion that would ultimately end one of the greatest careers in wrestling history. But here's what made this incident so much more than just an unfortunate accident. It represented the collision of 2 completely different philosophies about professional wrestling. Hart represented the old school, meticulous preparation, respect for your opponent's safety, and the understanding that your job was to make your opponent look good while protecting them from harm. Goldberg represented the new approach, raw athleticism, limited training, and a focus on looking dominant rather than working collaboratively. The wrestling community's reaction was swift and brutal. Fans who had already questioned Goldberg's credentials now had concrete evidence of what they saw as his recklessness. This wasn't just about one bad kick. It was about what that kick represented. To them, it proved that Goldberg's rapid rise had come at the expense of proper training and respect for wrestling fundamentals. What made the situation even more tragic was the timing. Hart was in the midst of rebuilding his career after the Montreal Screwjob controversy. He had found new life in WCW and was delivering some of the best work of his career. Fans were invested in his redemption story, and Goldberg's careless kick didn't just end Hart's career, it destroyed a narrative that fans desperately wanted to see completed. The incident also highlighted the broader issue of wrestler safety in an era when companies were pushing the envelope to compete with each other. Fans began to see Goldberg as a symbol of everything wrong with this approach, a performer who was more concerned with looking impressive than protecting his colleagues. Every subsequent Goldberg match was viewed through this lens, with fans scrutinizing his every move for signs of recklessness. But perhaps most damaging was Goldberg's response to the incident. Rather than showing genuine remorse or taking responsibility for ending Hart's career, Goldberg's public statements often came across as defensive or dismissive. This lack of accountability only deepened fans' resentment and confirmed their belief that he didn't truly understand or respect the wrestling business. The Hart incident became a rallying point for Goldberg's critics, a concrete example they could point to whenever defending their position. It transformed abstract complaints about his wrestling ability into a very real discussion about wrestler safety and professionalism. When Goldberg signed with WWE in 2003, it should have been a fresh start, a chance to prove his critics wrong and win over a new audience. Instead, it became one of the most spectacular failures in wrestling history, and the reasons why reveal everything about the fundamental disconnect between Goldberg and wrestling fans. WWE fans in 2003 were sophisticated. They had been conditioned by the Attitude Era to expect complex characters, nuanced storylines, and performers who could excel both in the ring and on the microphone. They had watched The Rock evolve from a bland babyface into one of the most charismatic performers in entertainment history. They had seen Steve Austin transform from a generic character into a cultural phenomenon through sheer force of personality. Then came Goldberg, with the exact same character he had used in WCW 5 years earlier. No evolution, no adaptation to WWE style, no acknowledgement that the wrestling landscape had changed dramatically. It was like watching someone try to use a flip phone in the smartphone era, technically functional, but completely out of touch with current expectations. The problems became apparent immediately. Goldberg's promos, which had been adequate in WCW's more straightforward presentation style, felt wooden and awkward in WWE's more entertainment-focused environment. While other wrestlers were delivering memorable catchphrases and engaging in witty banter, Goldberg was still growling generic tough guy lines that felt like they belonged in a different decade. But the real disaster was in the ring. WWE fans had been spoiled by the incredible match quality of the Attitude Era. They had seen The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin deliver classics at WrestleMania, watched Mick Foley sacrifice his body for their entertainment, and witnessed The Undertaker create some of the most memorable moments in wrestling history. When Goldberg delivered the same 3-minute squash matches that had worked in WCW, WWE fans rejected them completely. The Goldberg sucks chants that echoed through arenas weren't just expressions of disapproval, they were statements of rebellion against what fans saw as WWE's attempt to force an outdated attraction down their throats. These fans had invested years in WWE's product and felt insulted by the company's assumption that they would automatically accept a performer who hadn't earned their respect. What made the situation even worse was the obvious disconnect between WWE's presentation of Goldberg and fan reaction. Commentary teams would hype his dominance while crowds sat in silence or actively booed. The company kept pushing the narrative that Goldberg was a major attraction, while attendance and television ratings told a different story. The psychological impact on Goldberg himself became apparent as his WWE run progressed. He looked uncomfortable, uncertain, and increasingly frustrated with the negative reactions. This discomfort translated into even worse performances, creating a downward spiral that culminated in one of the most infamous matches in WrestleMania history. The WWE transition failure wasn't just about one performer struggling to adapt, it was about the collision between corporate expectations and fan reality, and it set the stage for even greater disasters to come. March 14, 2004, Madison Square Garden, the night that Goldberg's reputation reached its absolute nadir and created one of the most uncomfortable viewing experiences in WrestleMania history. What happened that night wasn't just a bad match, it was a perfect storm of fan resentment, corporate miscalculation, and performer apathy that created a moment so cringeworthy it's still discussed 20 years later. The setup seemed promising on paper: Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar, Two legitimate athletes with impressive physical credentials. But wrestling fans are incredibly savvy, and they knew something that WWE hoped they wouldn't care about. Both men were leaving the company immediately after the match. This wasn't a contest to determine the future of WWE. It was a contractual obligation being fulfilled by two performers who had already mentally checked out. The crowd's reaction was immediate and brutal. Before the match even began, fans were chanting "You sold out" at both competitors. But this wasn't just about the performers leaving, it was about what their departure represented. Fans saw Goldberg and Lesnar as mercenaries who had taken opportunities away from wrestlers who were committed to the company long-term. Every dollar spent on their contracts was money that could have gone to performers who actually cared about WWE's success. What followed was 18 minutes of the most awkward wrestling you'll ever see. Both men moved through the match like they were underwater, delivering half-hearted offense and showing none of the intensity that had made them stars. The crowd's hostility was palpable, with fans literally singing "na na na na, hey hey hey" goodbye to express their desire for both men to leave. But here's what made this particularly damaging for Goldberg. Lesnar was young, talented, and had legitimate reasons for leaving. He wanted to pursue NFL opportunities. Goldberg, on the other hand, was seen as a veteran who should have been professional enough to deliver a quality performance regardless of his future plans. His lackluster effort that night confirmed every negative stereotype about his commitment to the wrestling business. The psychological impact of this match extended far beyond one bad performance. It became a symbol of everything wrong with WWE's approach to part-time performers and celebrity attractions. Fans would reference WrestleMania 20 for years afterward whenever WWE brought in an outside performer or pushed someone they perceived as uncommitted to the business. What's particularly fascinating is how this match affected the live audience's relationship with WWE itself. Many fans in attendance that night felt betrayed. They had paid premium prices for WrestleMania tickets expecting to see performers give their best effort, and instead they witnessed what appeared to be two men going through the motions. This breach of trust between performer and audience is one of the most serious sins in professional wrestling. The match also highlighted the importance of crowd psychology in wrestling. When an audience turns hostile, it can poison the entire atmosphere and make even competent performers look terrible. Goldberg and Lesnar found themselves in a feedback loop where crowd hostility made them perform worse, which generated more hostility, which made their performance even more lackluster. As Goldberg's career entered its later stages, a new source of fan resentment emerged that would prove even more damaging than his in-ring limitations: the part-time performer problem. This issue strikes at the heart of what wrestling fans value most: consistency, dedication, and respect for the wrestlers who show up every week to build the product. Imagine you're a wrestling fan who follows the weekly shows religiously. You watch Monday Night Raw every week. You invest in storylines. You develop emotional connections to performers who are grinding it out on the road 300 days a year. You see talented wrestlers like Cesaro, Sami Zayn, or Kevin Owens delivering excellent matches week after week, often in meaningless mid-card positions, waiting for their opportunity to break through to the main event level. Then, out of nowhere, Goldberg returns for a handful of appearances, immediately gets inserted into the main event picture, and walks away with championship gold that full-time performers have been working years to achieve. This scenario has played out multiple times throughout Goldberg's later career, and each instance has deepened fan resentment. The Kevin Owens situation in 2017 perfectly encapsulates this frustration. Owens had spent months building credibility as Universal Champion, engaging in compelling feuds, cutting excellent promos, and proving himself as a reliable main event performer. He represented everything that modern wrestling fans appreciate: technical skill, character development, and unwavering commitment to the product. Then Goldberg returned, defeated Owens in a squash match, and took the championship that Owens had worked so hard to legitimize. But the problem goes deeper than just championship reigns. Every time Goldberg appears, he takes a spot on the card that could have gone to a full-time performer who needs the exposure. Wrestling fans understand that television time and pay-per-view spots are finite resources. When those opportunities go to part-time performers, it directly impacts the career trajectories of wrestlers who are trying to build their reputations and connect with audiences. The psychological impact of this pattern cannot be overstated. Wrestling fans develop parasocial relationships with performers. They want to see their favorites succeed, and they invest emotionally in their journeys. When a part-timer like Goldberg swoops in and derails those journeys, it feels like a personal betrayal. Fans begin to question whether their investment in the product matters at all if the company will always prioritize short-term nostalgia over long-term storytelling. What makes this even more frustrating is the transparent nature of these decisions. Fans can see that Goldberg's returns are typically timed around major events like WrestleMania or when ratings need a temporary boost. This corporate calculation strips away any pretense that his appearances are based on creative merit or fan demand. Instead, they feel like cynical attempts to generate quick revenue at the expense of the product's long-term health. The part-time problem also highlights the generational divide in wrestling fandom. Older fans who remember Goldberg's original run might appreciate the nostalgia factor, but younger fans who have grown up with different wrestling styles and expectations often view his returns as obstacles to the progression they want to see. This creates tension within the fan base itself, with different segments arguing about the value of established stars versus emerging talent. If you thought Goldberg's reputation couldn't sink any lower, the Saudi Arabia shows prove that there's always room to fall further. These events became the perfect storm of everything wrong with modern Goldberg: aging athleticism, dangerous performances, and corporate priorities that completely ignored fan sentiment and wrestler safety. The 2019 Super Showdown match against The Undertaker stands as one of the most uncomfortable viewing experiences in recent wrestling history. Picture this: two legends, both clearly past their physical primes, attempting to recreate the magic of their younger days in front of a crowd that could sense the impending disaster. What followed was a masterclass in how not to handle aging performers. Within the first few minutes, Goldberg knocked himself unconscious attempting his signature spear, running headfirst into the ring post with such force that he was visibly concussed for the remainder of the match. But here's where it gets truly disturbing: the match continued. For nearly 15 more minutes, fans watched a clearly injured Goldberg stumble through spots, botch basic moves, and put both himself and The Undertaker at serious risk. The psychological impact on viewers was profound. Wrestling fans have a complex relationship with violence in their entertainment. They want the illusion of danger without actual harm coming to the performers they've invested in emotionally. Watching Goldberg clearly injured and continuing to perform crossed that line from entertainment into genuine concern for human safety. But the Undertaker match was just the beginning. The 2020 Super Showdown encounter with the Fiend Bray Wyatt created an entirely different kind of disaster, one that destroyed months of careful character building in a matter of minutes. Wyatt had spent the better part of a year crafting one of the most compelling supernatural characters in modern wrestling. The Fiend was presented as an unstoppable force, a character that existed beyond normal wrestling logic. Then came Goldberg, who defeated this carefully constructed monster in a brief, anticlimactic squash match that stripped away all of the Fiend's mystique in one fell swoop. This wasn't just a bad booking decision, it was creative vandalism. Fans who had invested emotionally in Wyatt's character development watched months of storytelling get obliterated for the sake of putting a championship on a part-timer who would disappear again within weeks. The reaction from the wrestling community was swift and merciless. Social media exploded with criticism, not just of Goldberg but of WWE's decision-making process. Fans felt insulted by the company's apparent belief that they would accept such transparent destruction of their investment in ongoing storylines. What made these Saudi Arabia disasters particularly damaging was their high-profile nature. These weren't throwaway matches on weekly television, they were major events that WWE promoted heavily and charged premium prices to watch. Fans who paid to see these shows felt genuinely ripped off, and their anger extended beyond Goldberg to the company itself. The incidents also highlighted the ethical questions surrounding aging performers and corporate responsibility. Should companies allow clearly diminished performers to continue wrestling? What obligation do they have to protect both the performers and the audience's investment in the product? To truly understand why Goldberg hatred has intensified in recent years, you need to understand how dramatically professional wrestling has evolved, and how Goldberg represents everything that modern fans have moved beyond. Today's wrestling landscape is fundamentally different from the late 1990s, and Goldberg's continued presence serves as a constant reminder of an era that many fans are eager to leave behind. Modern wrestling fans have been educated by the rise of independent promotions, streaming services, and social media access to wrestlers from around the world. They've watched Kenny Omega deliver masterpieces in Japan, seen Daniel Bryan's technical artistry, and witnessed how performers like CM Punk can blend athletic ability with compelling storytelling. Their standards for what constitutes quality wrestling have evolved exponentially. In this context, Goldberg's approach feels not just outdated but actively regressive. While modern wrestlers are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the ring, incorporating elements from mixed martial arts, strong-style wrestling, and innovative high-flying techniques, Goldberg is still relying on the same two-move combination he used 25 years ago. It's like watching someone try to compete in Formula One with a horse and buggy. The storytelling expectations have evolved just as dramatically. Today's fans appreciate long-term character development, complex motivations, and storylines that reward their investment with meaningful payoffs. They've seen how wrestlers like Hangman Adam Page can develop over years, how factions like the Elite can create intricate interpersonal dynamics, and how companies like AEW can build entire shows around character-driven narratives. Goldberg's character, by contrast, hasn't evolved at all. He's still the same silent destroyer he was in 1997, with no additional layers, no character growth, and no acknowledgement that the wrestling world has moved beyond simple good versus evil dynamics. For fans who have grown accustomed to nuanced storytelling, his appearances feel like interruptions from a much more primitive era of wrestling. The technical aspect cannot be ignored either. Modern fans have access to incredible wrestlers from promotions like New Japan Pro Wrestling, where performers like Will Ospreay and Hiroshi Tanahashi regularly deliver matches that would have been considered impossible 20 years ago. They've seen what peak athletic performance looks like in a wrestling context, and Goldberg's limited moveset feels embarrassingly basic by comparison. Social media has amplified this evolution by giving fans direct access to wrestlers' personalities and creative processes. They can follow their favorite performers on Twitter, watch behind-the-scenes content on YouTube, and gain appreciation for the craft that goes into creating compelling wrestling. This transparency has made fans more sophisticated in their understanding of what makes wrestling work, and more critical of performers who don't meet those elevated standards. The global nature of modern wrestling fandom has also played a role. Fans regularly watch content from Japan, Mexico, the United Kingdom, and other countries where wrestling traditions emphasize different aspects of the art form. This exposure has broadened their palates and made them less tolerant of the simplified American approach that Goldberg represents. Every time Goldberg appears in this modern context, he serves as a jarring reminder of wrestling's less sophisticated past, creating cognitive dissonance for fans who have moved far beyond that era. As we reach the end of this deep dive into wrestling's most polarizing figure, it becomes clear that Goldberg hatred isn't really about Goldberg at all. It's about what he represents in the broader wrestling ecosystem. He has become a lightning rod for every frustration that hardcore wrestling fans have with the modern industry, a symbol of corporate decision-making that prioritizes short-term profits over long-term storytelling and fan investment. The tragedy of Goldberg's legacy is that he never asked to become this symbol. He was simply a football player who transitioned into wrestling and found unexpected success. But the way that success was manufactured, protected, and repeatedly recycled has made him the face of everything that passionate wrestling fans believe is wrong with the business they love. Every Goldberg return serves as a reminder that fan voices often don't matter in corporate boardrooms, that part-time performers can overshadow full-time talent, and that nostalgia will always be easier to market than innovation. For fans who invest emotionally and financially in wrestling, these reminders feel like personal attacks on their intelligence and dedication. But here's the final twist that changes everything. Goldberg's polarizing presence has actually strengthened wrestling fandom in unexpected ways. The shared experience of criticizing his returns has united different segments of the wrestling community. Fans who disagree on everything else can find common ground in their frustration with Goldberg's booking, creating a sense of solidarity that transcends other divisions. In a strange way, Goldberg has become wrestling's most effective heel, not through his character work, but through his very existence as a performer. He generates genuine emotional reactions, creates passionate discussions, and keeps fans engaged with the product, even if that engagement is negative. Perhaps that's the most ironic aspect of the Goldberg phenomenon. A performer that fans claim to hate has become one of the most discussed figures in modern wrestling. The question now becomes, will wrestling companies learn from the Goldberg backlash, or will they continue to repeat the same patterns with other aging stars? The answer to that question may determine whether fan hatred remains focused on individual performers or expands to encompass the industry itself. What do you think? Have I missed any major reasons why fans hate Goldberg, or do you disagree with any of these points? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing different perspectives on wrestling's most controversial figures. And if you want to see more deep dives into wrestling psychology and fan culture, make sure you're subscribed because I've got some fascinating topics coming up that will challenge everything you think you know about this business we all love to analyze.